Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leanna Levine-Reisner. I am the Network Director of Plant-Powered Metro New York, joined by so many wonderful community partners from the New York metro area today, honoring the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and honoring all of the hard work that must still be done to overcome racial injustice everywhere, and certainly in our city. I want to acknowledge that we have so many wonderful folks with us today. A little bit about Plant-Powered Metro New York. We are an organization that is community driven and dedicated to the empowerment of all of you through health, empowering people to find better health and to overcome chronic disease through whole food, plant-based nutrition. And we do that in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways we do that is with the support of many other people who are here. And I want to just quickly recognize all of the partnering organizations who are joining us today and who have shared about this event with their communities. We have JASA, the Senior Service Agency. We have the Office of the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Health Disparities Center, Marlene Myerson, JCC Manhattan, and the SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University's School of Public Health Committee on Plant-Based Health and Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine Interest Group. Just a wonderful group of people, and you'll be hearing voices of each of these organizations today in addition to our presenters. So without further ado, I would actually love to have you introduce yourselves in the chat box. Tell us why you're here. Tell us where you're tuning in from. We would love to hear from you, even in this sort of impersonal setting that Zoom creates for us, but want to create an opportunity for connection as well. And I just wanted to know, Dr. Martin Luther King did some work on health injustice. I was reading a little bit yesterday about his work on desegregating hospitals. And one of the quotes that he has been, that he was quoted as saying was, "Of all forms of discrimination and inequalities, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhuman." And he was specifically speaking about healthcare, medical care, but there's more to the story. There's more about food in particular that we're going to be exploring today with our speakers. And I would actually like to start by inviting Pastor Lawrence Taylor from the Kenilworth Baptist Church in Brooklyn to step forward and share a few words with you as a way of setting the stage for our conversation today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so glad to be with you. I think it's only proper on Dr. King's holiday to have at this plant-based conference to emphasize a plant-based diet. In my case, I promote veganism. And let me make a disclaimer. I'm not trying to proselytize here, just to illuminate. But it's great to see Dr. Neal Barnard on. He can give you the science behind it. But when you hear the word vegan, social justice is not the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, you usually think of an array of fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, plant-based diet. That's for those who are informed. For the misinformed, they usually think of some Spartan, tasteless diet that they absolutely wouldn't even dare try. But at the core of veganism is a concern for the planet, a concern for others. Now, I'm not saying that turning to a plant-based diet makes you a better person than an omnivore, because I've met some mean vegans in my life. But I am saying that there's an intrinsic ethical aspect to veganism. It's not one-dimensional. To the contrary, it's multifaceted. First of all, it promotes optimum health. As was quoted earlier, Dr. King said in 1966 at a conference in Chicago, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhuman. Now I'm not saying that King was a vegan, but he did call attention to the nation to note that social injustice in terms of healthcare was the most preeminent. I think we see that in recent times. See that in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a revelation of the blatant inequality in our healthcare system. Black and brown people die at twice the rate of whites from COVID-19 because of pre-existing conditions, diabetes, hypertension, atherosclerosis, cardiovascular problems, just a host of vitamin deficiencies and et cetera. And of course, the exorbitant cost of pharmaceuticals and the lack of adequate health care only compounds the problem. And I should not fail to mention the case of bad choices that are often made in terms of food. Now, these choices are made because of a limited selection in our communities. And also there's a desperate need for nutritional education. I'm talking about an education that will dispel the myth about animal protein, an education that will expose the pernicious effects of some of our traditional dishes that we love to eat, an education that will tell us about the degradation of the earth by the cattle industry and the surge on the oceans by the fishing industry. So I just hope that this is a great expose, and the reason why we're all here is to promote good health. And so, thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Taylor. It's great to have your words to kick us off. I'd like to turn it over now to Minister John Williams, who is the founder, president, and CEO of New Creation Community Health Empowerment, which leads the Central Brooklyn Diabetes Task Force. And he is going to introduce our first speaker for you.
Good morning, folks. I am indeed delighted to be a part of this this event today. Martin Luther is a great person in my life. I am a minister of the gospel, but I'm also an urban public health specialist. And I came from the country of South America, Guyana, working for 10 years in the Amazon basin in gold and diamond mining. And here I am ministering in the area of public health, what we call health evangelism. And so Dr. Martin has always been a hero in my life in South America, you could know. And so the privilege is mine to introduce Dr. Batiste, who basically is, from California international cardiologist and an assistant clinical professor of California Riverside School of Medicine. Dr. Batiste, I love your work, and I have been following you for some time, and we are glad to expose you to our people on this work here in New York. And I look forward to the blessing that you would bring to us in this program today. God bless you as you present. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, it's a great honor to be invited to this event here, and I really appreciate the organizers putting everything together. And I'm excited to speak with you all today about this on this day, Martin Luther King's birthday celebration. Let me go ahead and share my screen and take a moment here. All right. One thing that we're going to get into as we go through this sequence is we're going to hear a lot of repetition, and repetition is not a bad thing. It's one of the fundamentals of learning, of education. And so we've heard this quote several times when we speak about the inequality of all forms of inequality and justice of health, the most shocking and inhuman, because it results in physical death. It's the true quote that he said in that particular instance. And what's so ironic about this is that a study in 2009 shed light on the fact that low-income rural and Black Americans in 2009 finally achieved the longevity of Caucasians living inside of urban cities. It took nearly 40 years to achieve a similar longevity that occurred 40 years prior. And so this is one of the areas that we know. We know that, as a matter of fact, African Americans are living sicker and sooner than many others, in 2020, more than any other year in the history of man, has shed light on this, that people of color, of African Americans and Black and brown individuals are subjugated towards the ill effects of COVID-19. And as a result of that, we see not only COVID-19, but we see many other health ailments. The CDC has shown several times really the impact that at every age group, whether or not it's in your 20s, your 40s, your 60s, your 80s, that African Americans, people of African descent, lead in terms of high blood pressure, lead in terms of diabetes, lead in terms of stroke. As a matter of fact, when the study was done in 2017 through looking at the state of cardiovascular health in African Americans, we found that not only was there an earlier onset of heart failure, and there's disparities in stroke and peripheral vascular disease, mortality from all cardiovascular diseases is significantly higher in African Americans compared with Caucasians. That's why I'm here. That's what my purpose is.
Dr. Batiste, I just want to interrupt you for a moment to please press the present slide button on your slides just so we can see them a little better.
Oh, okay. So sorry. Let me
okay.
come back to that.
Yes.
Are you able to see it better now?
That's better.
Okay. So one of the things, as I was mentioning in terms of the issues of longevity, and we see that we're across every age group, that African Americans tend to live sicker and die sooner than every other ethnicity, sicker than indigenous populations, than Caucasians, than Hispanics, as well as as Asian Americans, as we see African Americans live a shorter lifespan. Now, sociologists and epidemiologists and public health officials have looked at many components trying to figure out precisely what is the secret sauce? Why is it that we're living sicker and sooner? Is it an issue in terms of our education? Is it an issue in terms of our environment? Is it an issue in terms of housing or poverty or all these variables that we're seeing? And these are what many of us know and have learned is called social determinants of health. It's what we're seeing has been hypothesized. But what we find is that irrespective of status, irrespective of celebrity status, irrespective of education or of wealth, that when you normalize for it, African Americans still live sicker and die sooner. There was a study out of Johns Hopkins that was done comparing graduates, medical doctors who graduate from Johns Hopkins compared to Meharry, finding that people who graduate from Meharry of African descent lived sicker and died sooner from heart attacks compared to their Caucasian counterparts. So what's the cause? I hypothesize that it's something simple and called stress. We've all been under tremendous stress throughout 2020 and before. It's what we've seen repetitively. And stress, I would pretend to you, equals demands minus resources. And we understand what that means. When our bills come due at the end of the month, and they tally at $1,000, but all we bring home are $800, our demands exceed our resources. And so stress is there, and study after study has shown a correlation between chronic stress and increased disease burden. None other than 2020 has shown this lack of support, poor social networks. These things tend to lead towards an increased level of stress. And within the field of cardiology, it's something we characterize as the broken heart syndrome. I don't know, many of you out there have heard of something called the broken heart syndrome, called Takotsubo, this stress-induced cardiomyopathy that when subjugated to an overwhelming amount of stress, that the heart ceases to contract and it takes on an appearance in which it no longer is able to squeeze. Stress is powerful. Stress can be helpful, but when excessive stress can be something that can be life-threatening. And we see an association between stress and high blood pressure in African Americans from studies that have been done. We see association between perceived stress. It doesn't matter whether or not it's real stress or not. We see that when we perceive stress, there's a higher incidence of coronary heart disease. So yes, indeed, our health equals our resiliency divided by our stress. In other words, the higher our stress, the poorer our health. The higher our stress, the poorer our health. And there is one factor that Martin Luther King fought for during this time in order to combat this issue. And we know that racism is a form of stress. You say, well, Doc, how do you figure this? Well, studies have shown that when you look at individuals who perceive racism, they perceive stress, They are more likely to have severely blocked carotid arteries that can lead to strokes. That when individuals perceive stress, they're more likely to have increased coronary artery calcium scores when they perceive this thing called racial discriminatory stress. That we know that when folks perceive stress, not only that, we see that their telomeres shorten, that now which is a reflection of their longevity. We see this happen over and over, that yes, indeed, our health equals our resiliency divided by stress. Many aspects of life either feed into our resiliency or they feed into our stress. And so does our food. And so what do many of us do when we get stressed? We turn to a good old double date friends. We turn into Ben and Jerry's, and we like to partake of foods that are less health promoting. Oftentimes we use words like vegan, and that's a great way. It's great for animal rights and for environmental factors. But when the greatest enemy is the standard American diet is what we're dealing with, because when we get stressed, it's just simply, dessert is simply stress spelled backwards. We turn to these highly refined processed foods. We turn to these substances, whether or not they have a label of vegan or not, and we partake of them in our surroundings. And we pretend to what I call nutritional stress. Another level, our nutrition is either adding to our resiliency or adding to our stress. And what is nutritional stress? It's eating disease-forming foods, but not just eating disease-forming foods. It's not eating health-promoting foods. A simple question I ask my patients when they come in: tell me, sir, tell me, ma'am, what have you eaten for your health? Don't break it down in terms of macronutrients. I don't want to hear about the fats and the carbohydrates and the proteins. Tell me what you have eaten for your health. And too often, our dinner tables look like this, filled with highly refined processed foods, enriched, made in plants, but not from plants, are what we're eating and we're partaking of a regular day. And so many of you out there, we sit on our high horses and we say, you make a better choice. Make a better choice. We say it simply, so cavalierly, like it's no issue. Make a better choice. You think you have a choice, but many of us do not. We live in neighborhoods that are food deserts. There are food swamps that are riddled. I grew up inside South Central Los Angeles, and I remember driving with my father over 20 miles to go get fresh fruits and vegetables that are a higher cost inside the neighborhood where I grew up. Where many of us live. We live in areas where our food has become weaponized. It's weaponized against us as it's tailored specifically to achieve the precise amount of sweetness, this precise amount of salty flavor that is specific to you as a person of color, or as a Caucasian, or as a woman, or as a man, or as a child. That the tincturing of this has led to an addiction, revolving around several components of this evil trinity called the salt, sugar, and fat, right? These things that can become detrimental is what we see on a regular basis. This thing called, I like to characterize as slave food. Slave food, it brings up lots of sentiments inside of you when you hear a word like slave food. We know the most addictive foods are pizza or chocolate, cookie and chips and ice cream are the most addictive foods that when you tell yourself, I'm not going to eat it, you're enslaved to that food. You see, what slave food is the manipulation of nutrition for profit and for power. The business of business is business. And so manufacturers are not there for your health. My business, the business of Dr. Barnard, the business of my business is the business of health. The business of health is health. That we have to accentuate that. We have to promote this. This is where it becomes important because our health is tied to our resiliency divided by our stress. The food we eat can create stress in our bodies. It can create through numerous mechanisms to stimulate this and lead to it. But when we begin to change and use our nutrition for resiliency instead of for stress, that's where we achieve the health we want. That's where we achieve the health we want. Another quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, he said, "Why should there be hunger and privation in any land, in any city, at any table, when man has the resources and scientific know-how to provide all mankind with the basic necessities of life?" I'll tell you, Dr. King's quotes, even his early on quote about injustices, didn't reflect his belief system in terms of vegan or plant-based, but I can tell you this, his son Dexter was a known vegan. I can tell you this, his wife, Coretta Scott King, also converted to vegan and was into animal rights. We know the importance of this. And so we know we need to use food as life. We know that even if we go back culturally, whether or not it's inside the Caribbean or South America, or specifically in Africa, we find these things called superfoods that now industry begins to highlight. Foods rich in nutrients, so rich in nutrients, we even don't even have an understanding as it pertains to the value and the benefit of how they work together to help offset disease. I want to tell you today the fact that there is power in simple choices as we begin the process of eating foods that maybe culturally, my family is from Louisiana. And so there was a thing called red beans and rice. There was a thing called greens, mustard greens. And I wonder why my grandmother, she went to this hospital called Charity Hospital. I had no idea that this was a public assistance hospital when I was a kid growing up, not until I became an adult. But her staples were those that you can maintain your culture of who you are. And you say, well, Doc, I can't afford these things like this. Well, I tell you, buy your packaged food frozen. Buy the vegetables frozen from your Walmart, from your 99-cent store, from whatever the grocery that's local there to you. Buy the sack of rice that's there, the pound of dry beans that are there. These are the things that are important. And when you do this, studies have shown that this food substance that are green and rich and like Popeye can strengthen your body, that it's enriched with what? Vitamin K. It's enriched with what? Dietary nitrates that help recover the blood vessels and lower blood pressure. That it's been shown to be associated with a reduction in the risk of cardiovascular events exponentially. We know that too as well, that when we look at these things, the beans, like I mentioned, whether or not it's lentils or if it's red beans or if it's pinto beans or black beans, that these are rich in resistant carbohydrates and fiber. There was a study that was shown recently that came out that told us that as we increase our fiber, that our gut microbiome, that bacteria that lives inside of our stomach, that we're actually more bacterial DNA than we are our human DNA, now has the ability to reduce the burden of severity of COVID illness. There's power that's here. We can reduce in terms of diabetes. It can reduce cardiovascular events is what we see there. Same with whole grains. We find that when we eat the food, I always say the food that is not pre-chewed, you want the food that makes your jaws work. I want your jaws tired. That tells you you're eating fiber-rich food, that there's power not only for cancer, there's power not only for reduction in cardiovascular events. That's where there's power that's there. We know that when you begin to eat in just berries and fruits, significant power. New England Journal of Medicine quoted a study from back in 2016 roughly that looked at Asians in China and found exponential increases by ingestion of fruits from anywhere from 30 to 36% reduction in cardiovascular events. There is power in the choices. What are you eating for your health? We need to choose and switch over to adding to our resiliency instead of adding to our stress through our food is really the goal. As we begin to do this, our nuts and seeds, similarly by getting our omegas in, by getting these things that are going to help strengthen our mind and help reduce the burden of depression, anxiety, there's power that's here. Studies have shown similarly that when you begin moving the orange bracket from eating any and everything down to a plant predominant diet, the green bar, that all of a sudden the weight begins to shed, that all of a sudden the blood pressure begins to dissipate, that all of a sudden the cholesterol begins to dissolve and melt away. I want to tell you that this is nothing that's not new. And there's a saying out there by Alexander Chase, a former author, who said, a shocking occurrence ceases to become shocking when it occurs daily. No longer am I shocked when I have a patient who transforms their diet and similar to the studies that have been done by Dr. Barnard, similar to the studies that have been done by Dr. Ornish, reverse their coronary artery disease. I want to leave you today with another quote. This one is not by Martin Luther King, but it's by another great philosopher named Bruce Lee. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. We must apply. We must do to make a change and fight this thing of injustice of health. Thank you.
Fantastic, Dr. Batiste. Thank you so much. You brought so much to the table. Before we do questions with you, though, we are going to move over and have Dr. Barnard share more with us. To introduce Dr. Barnard, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rich Rosenfeld, who is the chair of SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University's Committee on Plant-Based Health and Nutrition, and the chairman and program director of otolaryngology. So Dr. Rosenfeld, come forward.
Hey, thank you, Liana, and thank you for putting together this wonderful venue. At SUNY Downstate for about 4 years now. We've been looking to go pretty plant forward and had the joy of working with Leanna and her group, the School of Public Health, the Brooklyn Borough President's Office, and had the privilege recently of becoming board certified myself in lifestyle medicine, apparently one of 2 otolaryngologists. So we're going to start something. And through the ACLM, I'm actually working, chairing a project for expert consensus on not just managing, but reversing type 2 diabetes with diet. So we look forward to getting that done in the coming months. And it's really with great joy and tremendous pleasure that I introduce Neal Barnard, who those of you in the field know needs no introduction. He's from GW University in DC, and importantly, the president of the Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM. I would encourage you to go to their website, pcrm.org, where you'll find incredible free resources on nutrition, health topics, ethical research and science, and of course, the opportunity to support their work. And Neal has done incredible studies on diabetes, body weight, pain, and really did some of the groundbreaking research on type 2 diabetes as a potentially reversible condition through diet. He's a prolific author with over 100 scientific publications and 20 books, and is the editor-in-chief for the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, a book that's made available to all US medical students. He leads programs through the PCRM in preventive medicine, nutrition, higher ethical standards, and I'm delighted to have him present on diabetes as a reversible condition. So, Dr. Barnard, thank you. It's all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, Liana. Thank you to everyone who was involved in organizing today's program. It's delightful for me to be able to share some time with you. And I want to salute and thank my friend, Dr. Columbus Batiste, for an outstanding presentation. I just have a few things that I want to add about some of the research that we have been doing, particularly in an area that he mentioned, which was diabetes, where we are seeing such disparities, but also so much hope when we can tackle these things using the humble power of food that turns out to be tremendously powerful, often surprisingly so. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and share some images with you. If you don't mind, I'd like to also begin with a word about COVID. Because it used to be that diabetes was a condition that would kill you over 40 years. Your heart would start to be attacked, your kidneys would be attacked, and your life would be shortened. But when COVID came in, we started to see that diabetes could kill you inside of 2 weeks. This began when the virus emerged in China at the very beginning. People who did not have diabetes had dramatically lower rates of mortality compared to people who had diabetes. And if you had diabetes and it was in poor control, again, these are data from the very beginning when the pandemic started in China, the mortality was 11% for people in poor control. People who had diabetes but got it under good control, mortality cut to 1%. And the differences were not that dramatic. For those of you who are familiar with hemoglobin A1C, that's the blood test we use to see how diabetes is doing, and we want to get it below 7 for people who have diabetes. Well, people at 8.1% had high mortality. People who got it down into the low 7s did dramatically better. So how do I do that? Well, the Adventist Health Study 2 gave us some clues about this. First, starting with just overweight. They looked at body mass index. And as you remember, that's your weight, but it's adjusted for how tall you are. And so what we say a healthy BMI is below 25. So the Adventist Health Study 2 had nearly 61,000 people, and they ranged in dietary habits. And then they looked at the body mass index of various groups. And on the left, you see that red bar. These are meat eaters, typical folks who, like me, I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, eating not the healthiest food. And your average BMI was not below 25, it was 28.8. Next to them, the orange line, semi-vegetarian. So they ate meat, but less than once per week. A little thinner. The tan line, pesco-vegetarian, fish, but no other meat. A little skinnier. The green line, lacto-ovo-vegetarian. What's that? Lacto meaning milk, ovo meaning eggs, but no meat at all. And by the way, once in a while, I run into somebody who says, well, I don't eat very much meat, or I really don't eat poultry, but I eat a little bit of it, and not too much dairy, but some, and some eggs and whatnot. I call them the ovo-lacto-pesco-polo-vegetarian, I guess, where you're eating kind of little bits of everything. They don't really do so hot. But look at the blue line on the right. A vegan is not a person from the planet Vegas. It's a person who's eating no animal products at all. And they've got the lowest BMI of every group, smack in the middle of the healthy weight range. But the reason that the American Diabetes Association published these data was not just body weight, it was diabetes. Same story. Meat eaters have the most, vegans have the least. And the closer you get to a plant-based diet, that plant-based power that Dr. Batiste was describing you. So our research team put this to the test with funding from the National Institutes of Health. We compared plant-based diet to a conventional diabetes diet in individuals who had type 2 diabetes already. So the conventional diet meant cut calories so that you're going to lose weight. Don't have too much carbohydrate at any given meal. Keep it steady and avoid the bad fats like trans fats and saturated fat. The plant-based diet was no animal products. So not even skinless chicken breast or fish. All the animal products were gone. Keep oils really low. So not a lot of fried stuff. And what we call low glycemic index foods. And this will not be on the test. But glycemic index is just the effect of a food on your blood sugar. So white bread tends to make your blood sugar rise pretty quickly, but rye bread less so. So white bread is high glycemic index, rye bread, lower glycemic index. We just favor the healthier carbohydrates. So no animal products, keep oils low, low glycemic index foods. To cut to the chase, back to hemoglobin A1C. Remember, everybody here had diabetes. The red line is the people on the conventional diet. They improved. They dropped by about 0.4 absolute percentage points. Very good. But wait a minute. That blue line, those are people on a vegan diet, and they had a drop in their A1C that's 3 times greater. Now, they're not counting calories. They're not limiting calories. They're not going on a low-carb diet at all, but they're having this dramatic improvement in their hemoglobin A1C. This is Vance. Vance was one of our very first research participants. Vance came into our research study. He said, I want to tell you what diabetes means to me. He said, it's all up and down my family tree. To me, diabetes means you're going to lose a leg. Means you're going to go blind. Means you end up on dialysis. Vance's father was dead at 30. Vance was 31 when he was diagnosed with diabetes. He came in to see us several years after his diagnosis. He started the vegan diet. And one of the first things he said to me is he said, you know, this is the easiest diabetes diet I have ever done. I thought, wait a minute, people think of going vegan as kind of challenging, right? He said, no. A typical diabetes diet makes you count carbohydrate grams and go to bed hungry every night because you got to follow this calorie restriction all the time. This is don't eat much. But on a vegan diet, you say, don't eat meat chili, eat bean chili. How hard is that? Don't put the meat sauce on my spaghetti, put the tomato sauce on my spaghetti. I can do that. And over time, he lost about 60 pounds over about 12 months. He stopped his diabetes medications at his doctor's request. His A1C was 9.5 to start. That's not good. But it dropped to 5.3. When I got his lab result, I got to tell you, I paced around my office for about 15 minutes. 5.3 is a normal value. It's not diabetes. It's not pre-diabetes. This is a normal value. And I had a person who had diabetes. He had it for years. And now I'm looking, he could go into any clinic in the world and they would never diagnose him as ever having had this disease. Now, of course, I can maybe even smile and laugh about it now because we see diabetes reversal all the time. But at that time, to have Vance's disease go away, it was astounding. And when I shared this with him and later asked if I could let other people know what had happened, he said, well, sure, make sure you tell him my erectile dysfunction went away too. So anyway, it's astounding to see what can happen. All right, so what's this healthy diet? It's fruits, it's grains, it's legumes, and legumes just means beans, peas, lentils, vegetables, and take your vitamin B12 for complete nutrition. And if you don't mind, I just want to walk you through how this works because people get confused. They imagine that I got diabetes from eating sugar or something like that. That's not it. So if you don't mind, let me take 2 minutes. I want to give you a little science here. This purple oval, that's a cell in your body. Let's say it's a muscle cell. And the reason I'm showing you a cell is because that's what sugar is for. Glucose, sugar, powers that cell. Just like gasoline powers your car, glucose powers your muscles. That's what gives you the ability to move around and do things, okay? Here's the problem, that all that glucose is outside the cell, it's not in the cell. And if it's not in, it can't do any good. Okay, so the membrane, the cell membrane keeps the glucose out. Nothing's happening. Well, what am I gonna do? There are channels that will let that glucose in, but they are shut. So I need a key. I need a key to open it up. And by the way, if the little photo strip that you're seeing on the right-hand side is getting in the way of your seeing part of the diagram, you can just minimize that, or you can even drag it right out of the way if you like. Okay, so here's your key. Your key is insulin. And that insulin key goes from the pancreas to a receptor on the cell. The insulin attaches to that receptor, and as soon as it does, it opens up these little channels, just like a key in a lock. It opens the door and in goes the glucose. Hooray, there it's going inside. That's what's supposed to happen. So how could anything ever go wrong? What could go wrong is my dinner looks like that. My lunch looks like that. My breakfast looks like that. I'm eating a lot of animal products and animal fat and vegetable oils too. And is there a lot of fat in these foods? You bet there is. You add it up, there's lots of fat in there, and that fat ends up in your cells. There it is. I ate my chicken salad sandwich today with extra mayo and cheese, and the fat's building up in my cell. And when that happens, you get a condition called insulin resistance. The key, the insulin key still attaches, but nothing happens. It doesn't work. Those channels don't open up and the glucose can't get inside. That's insulin resistance. That's how diabetes begins. What am I going to do? Well, let's see. Vegan diet means no animal products, so there's no animal fat in the diet at all, not even one drop. Great. And if I keep the oils really low too, that fat starts to dissipate. This is what was happening in Vance's body. The fat is going away, and when the fat goes away, the key works again. And now the glucose can come inside the cell, and everybody is happy. Okay, so that's what was happening during our research studies when people went on this simple diet without calorie counting, without carbohydrate restriction. Okay, now I want to get a little more scientific with you. Let's go to New Haven. Yale University researchers brought in a group of people. They were 26 volunteers. They gave them a glucose tolerance test. If you have diabetes, you've had this. You swallow this sugary goo and then they measure your blood sugar afterward. And some of the people were insulin sensitive. That's normal and healthy. Others were insulin resistant, meaning something their cells weren't accepting the sugar anymore. Okay, let me tell you about these people. They were young, 28 years old, 26 years old on average. These young people, they were thin, average weight, 132 pounds, 141 pounds. And did they have diabetes? No. That A1C of 5.1, 5.2%, that's totally normal. However, let's look inside their bodies. To do that, we're going to use a special technique. It's called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Do you ever have an MRI to look at a twisted ankle or something like that? Same thing. It's this big donut-shaped magnet, and I put you into it. And what we find is I can look inside your muscles. I can look inside your liver. I can see the buildup of fat there. And now here are the results of this study. Every dot here is a person. And I'm looking at the fat inside their muscle cells. It's called intramyocellular lipid. Every dot's a person. And as you can see, these are the healthy people. They've got some intramyocellular lipid, but not a lot. Not a lot of fat building up inside their cells. These are the ones who are insulin resistant. They've got all that fat inside their cell. And in turn, that's affecting their mitochondria. Do you remember that from your high school biology? Those are your burners. And what you can see is that their mitochondrial activity is starting to get shut down. It's not working very well. Now, these are young people, they're thin, and they don't have diabetes. But all the while, that insulin resistance is starting to build up. They've been eating fatty foods, animal products, and so forth. The fat is building up in their muscle cells. Their mitochondria are shutting down, so their cells aren't working right. They're not going to have diabetes for another 15 years. But the process is starting now. Okay, so can this diabetes diet, this vegan diet, can this work for everybody? Well, our research team did a very large study. We published the main results in JAMA Network Open about a month ago. And in the course of this diet study, we looked at how different folks did. And we had 113 Black participants, 117 white participants, and the change in BMI, identical. And the change in total cholesterol, just about identical too. In other words, this is the diet that we prescribe for everybody. Okay. Now, there are some places where you're going to see foods that are not really quite so healthy. Take a look at this. These are processed meats, bacon, sausage, ham, those kinds of things. Well, the World Health Organization came out a number of years ago, back in 2015, and said that every portion of processed meats that you eat is going to increase your risk of colorectal cancer by 18%. Well, there are people who have bacon for breakfast and maybe a hot dog for lunch, maybe 2 hot dogs for lunch. That's 3 portions. In the course of a day, that increases your risk by 54%. Well, here's the problem. That picture that I showed you of all that bin of bacon and so forth, where was that? Was that taken at Arby's, McDonald's? No. It was taken at my hospital. The George Washington University Hospital fries up bacon, they fry up sausage, and they feed it to the patients, to the hospital staff, to the visitors, to the medical students. And everyone gets the idea that bacon must be healthy for me. It's being served in a hospital. Yes, that's right. You're recovering from colorectal cancer, and they're going to feed you the very foods that caused it in the first place. Now, racial disparities are a huge issue, not just in diabetes, but also in colorectal cancer. Now, these are data going back more than 20 years. And overall, colorectal cancer is reducing. It's falling, it's dropping. You can see it's dropping across the board. But there are 2 things that I'm concerned about. You see that red line? That's African-American men and women. They are dying at a higher rate for colorectal cancer than other races. The other thing that is just as concerning is that when we look at data for young people, and I'm going to say anybody up to 49 is young in my book, cancer rates are rising. Colorectal rates, cancer in particular, but many other forms of cancer are rising in young people. Why? Because we're marketing bacon to kids. We're marketing sausage to kids. They serve it in fast food restaurants, they serve it in schools, and they serve it in hospitals, telling everybody this is healthy, but this is causing these very problems, and they're causing disproportionate problems as well. We've got to change this. So how are we going to change this? The American Medical Association, back in 2017, said, you know who's got to lead the way on this? Let the hospitals lead the way. Because when hospitals said you can't smoke anymore, everybody realized smoking's unhealthy. It's time to change. So that's what the American Medical Association said. They called on hospitals to have healthy plant-based foods for any patient who wants them, to get rid of the processed meats completely, don't even serve them, and have healthful beverages too. And I wouldn't be telling you this if there weren't something that you could do about it. In New York State, there will be a piece of legislation being introduced to improve healthy hospital food. And I'd like to ask all of you to be attentive to that. We'll let you know more about it. We can improve health right here in New York, just like everywhere else. Okay, what's a healthy diet? Fruits, grains, vegetables, legumes. Don't forget your vitamin B12. You need it for healthy blood. You need it for healthy nerves. You don't need much. The RDA is 2.4 micrograms, and it's the supplements are in every drugstore, every health food store, and it's also added to fortify a number of foods. So if a friend of yours dragged you to this lecture and said, you're going to really enjoy this, and by now you're thinking, okay, I get it, but gee, I haven't thought about really doing this exactly, and I'm not quite sure how I'd start. Let me show you how we do this with our patients and our research participants. We've introduced healthy vegan diets in thousands of people, and I have never seen anyone unable to do these two simple steps. Step one, don't change your diet. For the first week, just check out the possibilities. So by that, I mean, take a piece of paper and write breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. And over the next 7 days, your task is to fill in foods that might work. Think about it. Okay, gee, every day I have cornflakes with milk. I guess almond milk, they talk about it, but I never tried it. Now you got 7 days, go to the store, buy it, try it. If you like it, write it down. Oatmeal with blueberries. For lunch every day, I have a chicken sub over at Subway. Well, try the veggie sub and see how you like it. After 7 days, you'll have a pretty good list. Now you've gone through step one, you've got your list. Step two is to eat those foods. For 3 weeks, do it all vegan all the time, but that's easy because you can do anything for 3 weeks and you've already got your list. So go for it. After 3 weeks, two things will have happened. First, you are physically healthier. You're losing weight, you're feeling better. If you have diabetes, your blood sugar has already started to drop, which, by the way, if you have diabetes, talk to your doctor, let your doctor or caregiver know you're doing this diet because it is powerful. Your doctor will then need to work with you to reduce or eliminate your medications when the time comes. But don't do this all on your own. Let your caregiver know that you're doing it. But the second thing that happens is, in addition to the physical changes, your tastes and your attitudes about foods are going to change as well. You're discovering all kinds of new food products, new tastes, new websites, new recipes, new restaurants, and you're discovering that a lot of your friends have been doing this for a long time, wondering where you've been. So step one, take a week and give it a try. Step two, do it for 3 weeks. It will absolutely change your life. Let me unshare my screen. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody at JCC for making this possible, and to all of the other presenters. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. But more than anybody, I want to thank all of you who are participating in this, because you've got information that you are going to share with other people. They're going to remember you did that, and they're going to try some healthier diets, and you're not going to know how many lives you're going to save, but I guarantee you that's exactly what will happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barnard. And I am so pleased to bring up Peggy Hill, who is a Plant Powered Metro New York board member and a yoga instructor and wellness leader in her own right. Peggy's going to walk us into a Q&A with Dr. Barnard and Dr. Batiste.
Hello, and thank you so much to both Dr. Batiste and Dr. Barnard. I'm excited. These presentations were fabulous. The comments, I don't know if you've seen them, people are energized, ready to make some changes given your presentations. So I just have a couple of questions before I get to the customer questions, so to speak. First, Dr. Batiste, you mentioned there is power in our choices. And what I like to, you said so many beautiful things, but I love the idea of us feeling empowered to make a difference in our lives by the foods that we select. And so that being said, how would you, could you expand a little bit on slave food? And I love the concept of us being enslaved to food and the addiction. And some people are saying, well, I can't break that addiction. I don't know how to do it. And so what have you found in your practice or in your research that really helps someone to just make that change? Because it's hard to break that addiction. I know I've tried it, and it takes a lot of effort. What's your finding on that?
No, it's a great question, and one I appreciate the feedback and so forth. When we look at slave food, so slave food was a project that was born to really provide education. One of the things I found in my practice is I really stepped out, really essentially stepping out on faith, because as an interventional cardiologist, we get our sort of badges by the more complex procedures we get, not by speaking about diet. So when I went down this venture in my practice, I recognize the fact that although the message is powerful in and of itself, I felt the desire to tailor it according to individuals. And that's where slave food really was born, about culturally specific information for the African-American community, but also similarly for the Latino community and then the indigenous communities and so forth. I think one of the perils that we're faced with inside of our society that we live in this highly processed, refined food system, that we're bombarded with advertisement. There's an old saying that I heard growing up, which is association brings about assimilation. And so I think one of the first steps is that we have to find ourselves inside of a group like this that can help support us. I think the second key thing is the fact that we have to embrace the power of wonderment. Wonderment is seeing the unfamiliar and the familiar. So that means that now as I travel to my local grocery, I travel to my big Walmart or Target, whatever the particular place is, that I'm going to see the unfamiliar and the familiar. I'm going to search out for frozen vegetables that will have shelf life. That I will search out canned beans and rice and grains and realize that, hey, just like any other type, I can begin to create meals that my taste buds transform to that still are reminiscent of the flavors and the aromas and the substance that I'm used to in the past.
Thank you so much for that, and for emphasizing that if you don't have fresh, you can still find frozen and
Yes.
and still have healthy meals, as opposed to just focusing, well, if I don't have organic, it's not plant-based, it's not fresh and wholesome. So that's an excellent point as well. Dr. Barnard, it's this definitely fits into the question of empowerment, being at the polls, and politics. So when you mentioned how in New York State, the health and hospital food legislation that's coming down the pike, as I think about it, for African Americans, we're typically known to just go to the polls for the presidential election, vote top box, and then walk away. But there's an importance to not just reaching out or going out every 4 years, but whenever there's an election, make sure certain elements get on the ballot, work with your politicians. And do you want to expand more on that? Because I think that's so powerful right now in the whole arena of understanding the power that we do have in our hands.
You said it, Peggy. I couldn't agree with you more. My hope is that people will be motivated to just give a call to their legislative representatives, let them know what they're thinking, because if you're in elected life, you're thinking about two things. You're thinking, what do my constituents think? Are they going to vote for me? And then what do my contributors think, who may not be the same? And so they're looking at, okay, who makes bacon, who's making money from that, and then who's voting for me. So a little phone call will help get that balance just right, where you say, and the things that I think, at least to me as a doctor, perhaps mean the most, and that when I'm speaking with legislators, I like to convey, is that we're not just talking about us now, this year. We're talking about the next generation. You look at a kid in school, 12 years old. To a doctor, you think, when you're 18, when you're 28, when you're 38, when you're 48, the risk of diabetes, of cancer, all this starts to not be funny anymore. And if we can get all of our public institutions thinking about the health, not just of us as adults, but of the next generation, and plant those seeds now, there's nothing more important than that. So don't be shy. We got to be polite, but we got to make some noise. And I am quite sure that we can win this. When I was in residency, we banned smoking in my hospital. And there were all kinds of people who complained, particularly the doctors, because they were busily smoking merit menthols in the doctor's lounge. I was one of them. But we realized we had to change. We did. We won then. We will win now.
Thank you. And I think it also includes something as simple as what's being fed to your children in the cafeterias. If there's a school board meeting, or I don't even know if they have PTAs anymore, but go out there and make your voice known for your children and your family. So from the audience, one question, I'll go back to Dr. Batiste. What are the foods you enjoy eating for optimal immune system health from when you're not feeling well?
That's a great and loaded question at the same point, like a loaded baked potato. So, I mean, so it's many of the things we speak about. So in terms of my green leafy vegetables, they're going to be rich in terms of my vitamin K and dietary nitrates, but very specifically in terms of immune health. And what we know in general is we know vitamin D is very important. And so obviously that comes from sunlight. Other than that, you're likely going to have to take supplements. There is small amounts inside mushrooms, which can be a part of one's dietary intake. We know too as well that there's huge power in the fruit. So in terms of variety as the spice of life, that we have to have a variety of different colors, also make up the fabric of our immune system that will be a benefit us. So we look at our berries, specifically have huge amount of power as far in them. Look at elderberry is powerful for quercetin. You're going to look at zinc from your beans. Your legumes are going to give you zinc, which we know that's going to be powerful for your immune system as well, and to heighten it. And so those are some of the mainstays, but we can't forget about the things outside the kitchen. That's one of the key components. Many times in these forums, we forget about the area outside of the kitchen. Our sleep is so powerful in terms of our immune system and in terms of our weight loss, in terms of metabolism of blood sugars. We know too as well that our activity, so whether or not it's yoga and our breathing becomes extremely powerful, that's there. This stress level plays a substantial role. As we know, it can significantly impact our ability to respond to things like vaccinations and various other aspects that are there. We know there's benefit as far as the cruciferous vegetables with heightening the immune system. When we look at broccoli, I believe it's broccoli rabi and so forth, that's extremely beneficial. So those are the ways in which I round out to help my immune.
I smiled when you said sleep, because that's one of the key areas I focus on in my yoga practice, because it's so important. Absolutely.
It is.
Yes, thank you. Outside the kitchen, I like that. Dr. Barnard, is there research on plant-based diets and type 1 diabetes? And there's a follow-up. If you started out as type 2 and became type 1, can you still reverse your condition?
Great question. In type 2 diabetes, that's the most common type, which is what I was describing. Your pancreas is still making the insulin key, as I call it, but your cells are resistant to it. In type 1 diabetes, the pancreatic cells that make insulin have been eliminated. They're gone, they're dead. So your body is making little or no insulin at all. So people with type 1 diabetes are going to continue to need to inject insulin no matter what diet they follow. But we still recommend a plant-based diet for this. Why? Because really two reasons. The first is that we discover when people go on a completely low-fat vegan diet with type 1 diabetes, their insulin requirements often go way down. They just need a lot less insulin. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, what kills you if you got diabetes is not usually a high blood sugar. It's heart disease or kidney disease. So you don't want a drop of cholesterol or animal fat in your diet. You want to baby your arteries. You want to baby your blood vessels. And so to do that, you want a healthy vegan diet. Now, there has not been a randomized trial comparing a plant-based diet versus, say, a control diet in people with type 1 diabetes. Our team at Physicians Committee is actually about to execute that very trial shortly. It hasn't been done yet. But what we do have are many, many case reports of people who have done these, and we publish this. And so that's where we are now. There's never a contraindication to it. If you have type 1 diabetes, run, don't walk, to a vegan diet. Vegan, low fat, don't forget your B12, it's a healthy diet, and do let your caregiver know that you're doing it, because your insulin requirements are very likely going to come down in a very impressive way.
So Dr. Batiste, and this is also for Dr. Barnard, but I'll go to Dr. Batiste just to alternate. What do you say to, it's in the family, it's hereditary. My grandmama had diabetes or heart disease, mama had it, auntie, uncles, everyone in the family has it. This is not going to work for me, so it's in our blood. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Dr. Batiste, what do you say?
Well, simple word, a simple phrase, your DNA is not your destiny. And study after study has shown us, whether or not it's through the power of epigenetics, and for those of you who may be less familiar with that terminology, think of it like your DNA has these dimmer switches on it that you can sway. It's like you can sway and lobby to have disease versus not have disease based upon your lifestyle preferences and so forth. Oftentimes what's passed along inside of our families are our recipes, right? It's our habits, our practices that we become encultured to what our environment. And that's really what is detrimental. And time after time, we've seen individuals break the vicious cycle of disease within their family and start a new trend of health and moving towards wellness. But I'll allow Dr. Barnard to chime in a bit.
No, I couldn't do anything other than agree with what Dr. Batiste just said. We see people who come from all different backgrounds and have all different risks and all different family histories, but a plant-based diet is the way to go for everybody. It sometimes requires some new tricks if you learned all kinds of bad things up until this point, but it's a surprisingly rapid adaptation. And you're kind of like a smoker. After about 3-4 weeks, you think, oh, I wish I had made this change a long time ago. I wish I'd been able to make this change, because you're so, in the same way as a smoker is so glad to be free from that, and they feel better. A person who's been an omnivore all their life and finally sees what a plant-based diet will do. It's just dramatic for so many people.
So a viewer question, I think it's the same question, but I'll pose it. What are some of the ways you have found successful in reaching those who do not have healthy eating habits and are living with these chronic conditions? So it's how are you reaching them successfully? Because in my mind, there's a lot of talk about eating healthier. People hear it, but they're not absorbing it. They're not making that change. They're not taking, I hear it, but I'm not heeding the recommendation. What do you do? How do you really reach them? It's, I think, what the viewer is asking.
I think that perhaps in some cases, it may well be that people have been reached, but I think people are naturally skeptical about diets that they hear about. And I think that's not a bad thing, because there are all kinds of goofy diets out there. And I think a certain amount of skepticism is appropriate. The thing about a plant-based diet, though, is that the research is now, the research base is just enormous. After we started doing studies on diabetes, many other groups have validated our findings, and not just for diabetes, but cholesterol control, reversal of cardiovascular disease, blood pressure lowering, and many other areas. There just is, it's really undeniable. And then I think the other thing that's happened is people have to say, yeah, but is this going to work in your life? And what I'm seeing now over the past maybe decade or so, 5 to 10 years, is because there are so many other people going vegan around us, it's becoming, we're kind of feeling validated in that choice. And we're seeing it now with so many athletes as well, particularly top level athletes. They're doing it in their lives. So I think it's arriving. And now what's left is kind of what Dr. Batiste was talking about, is the addictions that we're realizing that, okay, if you're serious about this, that means I'm going to have to break up with my double bacon cheeseburger. And it takes people a little time before they kick that out, but you get there.
Liana, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, let's take one more and then we'll move on.
Okay.
Thanks,
So the question about the myth of moderation, I've always heard, because it's like, yeah, you can eat anything as long as you do it in moderation. And so that's another question. And so there's also, I guess, something called non-fatty fish versus fatty fish. But, there's extra virgin olive oil, as long as it's organic, is better than canola oil. So, you can have it, but just with moderation, and have organic around it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll chime in briefly. I think to steal the title of a chapter from a book out of Caldwell Esselstyn's book, Moderation Does Kill. And I think that here's the key scenario is the fact that you have to ask yourself, what is my goal? What's my impression? I was taught inside of training that, listen, Columbus, your plan has to match your impression. If your impression is this person has a broken bone, then your plan should be you're putting a cast in it. If my impression is I want to live a healthful life, I want to invest in my health future by any means necessary, that means my actions and my plan has to coincide with that. That I'm eating foods that are beyond a shadow of a doubt have been shown to be health promoting. And not just saying I'm going to eat health promoting foods, but being very specific in the type of food. Not saying fruit, but being specific and saying berry. Not saying I'm just going to have fruit, I'm going to have berries, but how much am I going to have? When am I going to have it? Is it actually achievable? Is it relevant to what my goal is? And how long am I doing it? A SMART goal. These are some of the components that we have to use as we embrace this thing called lifestyle, because this is a long-standing journey. And we can't give up just because we fall off and we have something that may be less helpful for us and say, oh, well, forget it. What the hell moment, I'm gonna go back. We have to stay on course and stay true towards the goal.
Thank you so much, doctors, for your comments. And I am delighted that you're with us today. And thank you for Liana for the opportunity to facilitate this Q&A. So thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Peggy. And thank you all for your great questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but we'll try to answer a few more in the chat box as we go along. But we wanted to save this last segment to really go deeper on the how-to. What do we do next to really make whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds a part of day-to-day life? And Chef Brandy Cochran is going to do that for us. So I'm going to ask Pamela Straker from the Brooklyn Health Disparities Center. She serves as the Director of Operations, to come forward and introduce Chef Brandy for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brandy Cochran is the founder of Entrepreneur Meal Plan, which provides a space for leaders to connect, share resources, and have real talk about what it means to be a well-rounded business person. She's combined her passion and experience as a creative strategist and a plant-based chef to help over 150 creative professionals and entrepreneurs develop ideas, find simple, affordable resources, and take the guesswork out of eating simple, nutritious, and delicious food. She also co-founded Plant Candy, a company that focuses on helping families and communities find simple, affordable ways to add fruits, veggies, and whole grains to their diets and enjoy them. Brandy is also passionate about protecting the environment. She has been featured in the New York Times, the New York Daily News, and other publications for her community beautification work. Thank you so much, and Brandy, you're on.
Hi, I am excited to be here to show you the how in this process. So we just heard from Dr. Batiste and Dr. Barnard, who gave us all of this great evidence about why we should do this. And I want to show you how easy and simple it is. And I love that, like, we didn't necessarily talk about what we were going to talk before this, but the conversation around wonderment. I really love that word that Dr. Batiste used. And also talking about how growing up, he saw his mom with beans and rice and these things that when we think about a plant-based diet, we think it's something so like far left, like, you know, kombucha tea and tempeh only. But these simple things that we already use in our lives are things that make up a plant-based diet. So I want to help you with step one of what Dr. Barnard said, which is just explore the possibilities as we think about interjecting the plant-based lifestyle into our life. So what I am going to do a demo with you today is of something that I am calling Not So Dirty Rice. So it is a play on a Southern / Creole classic, Dirty Rice. And I'm going to head over to the kitchen and kind of talk through how I came up with this idea and how you can take some of the things that you enjoy in a non-plant-based diet and switch them to a plant-based diet to consider adopting this lifestyle a little more consistently. Stay tuned.
All right, we see you. We see your onion.
Great. So onion, that's the basis of this. Now I'm going to line up all the ingredients, then I'm going to go through the process. So we're going to do an onion. We're going to do a green pepper. We're going to do some celery. I have a little bit of mushrooms here. And this is just the produce that I'm going to go in. Now, before we started, I prepped some of the things that I didn't think made a lot of time waiting for you guys to have me bring together, the rice and the lentils. And I'm going to talk through that piece after I get these chopped up. So I want to start first with an onion, and I always love to do this demonstration where I help people talk about how do we properly cut an onion, right? So there's a top part of an onion and there's a bottom part of an onion, and if you cut your onion from top to bottom, it's going to help this experience of onion cutting a whole lot more. So we're going to take this, cut it down the center, and then we're going to use this back piece right here as our guide, and this is our front piece, right? So we cut it, we just simply peel this off. And onions are a great way to add flavor to almost any dish. It's the base of most dishes. I know lots of people who do not like onions, but they like the flavor of onions because they bring so much to a dish. Now, fun fact about cutting an onion. If you're planning to use an onion for raw preparation, you want to cut it from front to back. The front to back is how you're going to use it if you're going to use it for raw. If you plan to use it for cooking, you want to use it from left to right. So sometimes you might get a salad and you may think that, oh my goodness, this onion is super strong and it's not really tasty. Maybe that's the case, but more than likely it's because the onion may not have been cut properly. So the next time you decide that you want to try an onion in a salad, cut it from front to back before you enjoy it. Now, I'm going to show you a simple way to cut these things so that you get this process like super simple. You're going to use lines. So I want some pretty, probably mid-size chunks to go into this dish. So I'm cutting some lines across the center, as you see, and then I'm going to turn and I'm going to cut some across the top too. And this is just going to help make this onion cutting process so much easier. And then I'm going to cut back here, and then we're going to chop. And now, instead of crying my way through this process, I end up with these cool shapes that are kind of all the same size pretty quickly, and it did not take me a whole bunch of time. So when you are cutting onions, use your lines. Actually, when you're cutting all vegetables, use your lines. It's going to help make the process so much easier. So there we go. We're cutting an onion. Now I'm going to next chop up this green pepper, and it's a pretty large one that I managed to get. So I'm not going to use the whole one in this recipe. Before this started, I soaked this produce inside of a mixture of baking soda, apple cider vinegar, and some purified water. And that's just my natural way to clean off produce. Now I know they sell those expensive produce cleaners in the store, but you really don't need to get those. I find that the baking soda, apple cider vinegar blend does just really well. So I just took the inside out, and I'm just going to cut these into strips too. Yet again, using my lines. And this preparation is really the hardest part of like cooking. Once you get to the pot, this stuff gets really simple, but it's the prep. But if you take the time and use, like I say, these lines, it's going to make this so much easier. Now, here we go. And then now that I got my lines, I just go through and I cut. And I have all of my nice little squares, right? Now for this particular, a lot of times I'm talking through peppers and saying that you can interchange them. But for this particular recipe, it's something about, I don't know, certain Southern dishes that the green pepper is like the pepper. Like changing it out with the red or the yellow or the orange might not do it because it doesn't give that earthiness. It takes it a little sweeter. So that's just something to think about. Also, about these leftover pieces of onion skins, you don't have to throw these away. You can put all these into a bag, put them into the freezer, and make a broth. And that's the same for this bottom piece of celery or any leftover pieces of veggies that you're going to be using. So I'm going to take this celery. The one thing you want to do when you're cutting celery, the easiest thing is to smash it first. It's going to make cutting those lines so much easier. So I smash it first, cut it in half, and then I'm going to cut these lines. Yet again, lines are your friends in cooking. They just make everything so much easier, right? Then we flip them, and then we cut them again. Now, the cool thing about adding celery to a dish, especially if you are watching your salt intake, is that celery adds a really nice salty note to a dish. So this celery is going to give us those salty bits that you're looking for in this dish. And this dish is a no oil, no salt added dish. And I'm going to tell you how that works, because I know a lot of times people go, oh my God, no oil. How are you cooking without oil? What are we going to do? I'm going to show you exactly how we cook without oil. And you're not going to miss the flavor. Trust and believe. Oil does not add flavor to food. It just doesn't. So we got the base of this down now. I'm going to swap out and bring over the pan so you guys can see that process. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the components that are going to go into this dish. All right, so we got a pan here. So I'm just going to start by adding in the onion, pepper. And just going to let this cook down a little bit, let it sweat. I'm not going to put anything on it. There's no oil in this pan, as you can see. You'll just see this kind of cook down over time. Now, I'm going to let these cook down briefly, right? Now, the base of dirty rice is what? Rice. And also in the traditional recipe, you get some good old, sometimes you get sausage or some type of ground meat. I've also seen people that use like chicken livers or chicken gizzards and all of that kind of good stuff. So in this recipe, I swapped out the chicken gizzard slash liver piece for mushrooms. So mushrooms are a great way to add this umami flavor into your dish. They have a nice little bite to them, so that that's going to give that texture slash flavor profile in the dish. And to be quite honest, I don't even remember chicken livers or chicken gizzards having a unique enough flavor profile that I needed to build anything else into it. So we're just going to leave the mushrooms as is, because I remember those things just being like salted and deep fried. Now, the other component though that we're going to really go into is the lentils. Now, the lentils right here that I cooked beforehand, these lentils, I cooked these lentils down with everything that you would have loved to have in a sausage. So when we think about sausage, we think about sage, we think about fennel, we think about cayenne, we think about garlic, we think about onion. So I took all of those spices that you would have had in a sausage and put those into the lentils and let them cook down. So all of the lentil bites are going to taste like little bits of sausages, right? So as this kind of cooks down a little bit, I'm going to turn it up so I can cut down. And that's what we're going to think about when we're thinking about food. A lot of times in like the plant-based space, there's this thought process that it's really boring. I'm not going to have anything. It's going to be bland. I'm not going to like it. But if we really start to imagine ourselves creating food the way like we season our veggies the same way that we season our meat, and we think about the flavor profiles that we enjoyed in the plant-based, like in the non-plant-based space, and apply them to the plant-based space, that's really going to help us get excited about eating and continuing to stay with this diet. Now, oddly enough, growing up, I don't think my mom ever made dirty rice. It's something that I decided to rework because I was getting a little bored, and I'm always trying to figure out like, how do you play around with this stuff? So as you can see, this is cooking down. I'm still getting some of that caramelization that you would get even if you put oil in the pan, because it's liquid that's coming from the ingredients as they cook down. It's not sticking to the pan. I'm going to put in good old mushrooms now. I'm going to also put the garlic in now. And the reason I wait to put the garlic in a little later is because you don't want to overcook garlic because it gets bitter and kind of not too tasty. So you want to put it in right before you're almost done with the dish. Now, as these are cooking down, putting the rice in. Now, I did make this rice with a little bit of veggie broth, and instead of white rice, I use brown rice. Now, I know lots of people, well, not lots of people, some people I've heard don't like brown rice. And a trick that I found to help you like brown rice a little better is to soak it. It's something about soaking it that doesn't make it as, I guess, like hard to chew or as chewy or so differently texture from white rice. So try soaking your white rice a little bit similar to how you would do with a dried bean before you would cook that, and see if that would help, because that has helped with people that I work with who do not like it in its normal state. Then I want to put some of these, I'll call them sausage flavored lentils into this dish. So we get beans, we get rice, we get veggies, all mixed up in here.
That looks so good, Brandy.
Thank you. There's not an ounce of, meat in this dish. The flavor profile, like, you're gonna bite into this and you're not gonna miss the sausage, you're not gonna miss the chicken gizzards, you're not gonna miss any of that stuff. And I'm gonna put some Cajun seasoning, which is also the key to dirty rice. And this is also a pre-made, like I made this with spices, no salt seasoning that has a variety of things in it: smoked paprika, regular paprika, cumin, onion powder, garlic powder. What else is in here? A little oregano. All right, so simple. And I'm gonna take just a little bit more of the broth to just bring up all of that nice caramelization from the bottom of the pan. And that's another thing with oil-free cooking. If you're concerned about stuff getting stuck, literally, once you throw in some type of moisture to pull it off, you're fine. Your stuff's gonna come right out just fine. And oh, this brand, if you're wondering, Kitchen Basics is one of my favorite. Like, if you're not gonna make your own stock, they make an unsalted vegetable stock, which is pretty flavorful and really good if you're trying to infuse some flavor into your dishes. So this is the dish. I'm going to just plate it up so you can see some ways.
Brandy, are you cooking on medium heat or something else?
This is actually high, but it's high and it's not a flame, it's electric, so it's a little different. If I was cooking this on an open flame, it would be medium.
And in case you didn't notice, I did share Brandy's recipes right in the chat box through a file share. If you don't have a way of accessing that based on the different devices that you might be using, I will be sending them afterwards. So don't worry, you'll have a way of replicating this at home. That looks beautiful.
And I'm gonna just finish it up with a little bit of fresh parsley and some green onion. I think it's always nice just to kind of put some freshness back into any dish. First off, it just reminds you that that you're alive. At least that's kind of how I think about it. It opens up the palate. So this is just a little fresh parsley, and I'm gonna also put on some green onion. That, by the way, I've been growing these green onions like myself in my apartment. I haven't bought probably a green onion from the store in, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. They regenerate really, really well. So, and I don't have a green thumb. So if you are trying to figure out something like to get your growing herb confidence up, I would recommend starting with the good old scallion. These things are unforgiving and come in handy a lot. So there you go. That is not so dirty rice. That's
beautiful. Someone asked, is there a brand of jarred garlic that you like to use, or you prefer just sort of straight up plain?
If I use garlic from the jars, just make sure it just has water in it. That's the only recommendation I would say.
Excellent. All right, so Brandy's going to show us a quick seasoning recipe. Are we going back to your other surface, Brandy, or are we going to stay here?
We can move back here.
Okay, fantastic.
Cool. So as you can see, you could literally turn anything into whatever it is that you want it to be, as long as you think about how it was seasoned. So if anybody has any questions, I'm available to answer any if we have time.
Yeah, I think we may need to move on just for time's sake, but there were some great comments in the chat box just about different types of products, and one person looking specifically for cookbook recipes. So if you have any suggestions, go ahead and pop that into the chat box, because there are just so many wonderful recipes out there. One question about this dish is, can you freeze the dirty rice, or does it really need to be eaten fresh?
It's a really well, it actually is a really good dish to freeze. It freezes well.
Okay, great. And what kind of pan were you using?
Oh, my favorite new pan. It's the Our Place pan.
Excellent. Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Brandy.
Thank you.
It's always lovely to see how we can modify recipes that may be part of our cultural traditions that we really love and don't want to let go of, and see how we can embrace them in a new form. Before we wrap up today, first of all, I want to thank all of our presenters and our partners for making this possible, but we've got some exciting news to share with you. So don't pop off just yet. We have a few announcements from each of our partners, and I'll wrap up at the end. So I want to bring on Ayanna Besson, who is one of my new best friends. She is a graduate student at SUNY Downstate University School of Public Health. And Ayanna's going to share with you some exciting news about a project we have coming up that we'd like to invite some of you to participate in.
Thank you, Leanna. And firstly, I want to thank Dr. Barnard, Dr. Batiste, and Brandy Cochran for the wonderful information and the demonstration that they gave to us today. Thank you very much. So in light of everything that we had just discussed, it is with great enthusiasm that I announced that with Plant Powered Metro New York, as well as SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University and co-collaborators, we will be launching a 21-day Jumpstart program. And this is specifically for Black community leaders who work or live in Brooklyn, and this will be in mid-February. And so this program was generously funded by Veg Fund and the Office of the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams, and registration opens today. So to give you a little bit of insight about the 21-day Jumpstart program, well, it's a way to quickly get started in whole food plant-based nutrition, as well as so much support that you would need in that transition. And so you will learn how food can transform your health as well as prevent chronic disease. Some of the highlights include twice weekly educational sessions, culinary demonstrations by Chef Brandy, as we just saw, some peer support, mentorship, and guidance from a medical professional. And so we are going to put the link in the chat box. So please take a couple of minutes to just go over there and to copy down or write down the registration information. And, you know, at the top of the year, we always have those New Year's resolutions, whether it's we're going to lose some weight, or we're going to exercise more, or shed those quarantine kilograms. But, you know, this is a great opportunity to jumpstart your health and also to be a witness, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's more than just a meal, it's a movement. And so with that being said, I hope to see you there, and thank you guys for your time.
Thanks so much, Ayanna. We're super excited about this Jumpstart. So check it out and share it with the people who you know who are in leadership positions in Brooklyn. This is a really sort of fun and exciting way for us to provide support specifically to the Black community at this time, as we're still struggling with COVID, as we're still struggling with the previous epidemics of chronic illness. And we want to make it real for people. We want to make it possible. Now I'm going to call up Aisha Paralon, who is from JASA, the director of their senior centers. Aisha.
Thank you, Leanna. Good afternoon, everyone. I just second what everyone has said, that the presentations that we had were excellent. And I hope, like me, that you all have taken lots of notes. So in brief, JASA is a private not-for-profit that primarily serves older New Yorkers across a range of service areas, including housing, home care, legal services, NORCs, and senior centers, which is my area. We currently have 22 senior centers throughout New York City. And during COVID, we've been focusing on making wellness calls and offering virtual programming. So to Dr. Batiste's comment earlier about surrounding ourselves with like-minded people to help us remain consistent, in this case, with whole food plant-based lifestyle, JASA is very fortunate to be collaborating with Plant Powered Metro New York on a number of health-related workshops, some of which will be one-day classes and others will be 4 or 8-week series through June. The first one-day class that's being offered is titled Improve Your Immune Health with Food. It will be this Friday, January 22nd from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. And the first 8-week workshop series is called The Power of Food for Healthy Weight Management, and that will start on February 4th. This series is composed of Food for Life nutrition education and cooking classes created by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, otherwise known as PCRM. And the weekly classes will include videos, cooking demonstrations, and group discussions on losing weight while eating whole food plant-based, and how eating this way improves blood pressure, kidney health, joint health, and cardiovascular health. To register for these or any other virtual programs that we're offering at our senior centers, unfortunately or fortunately, you must be 60 years or older and visit the JASA website at www.jasa.org. You look under events and there's a brief intake to complete, or you can call 212-273-5272. Please feel free to share this information with your friends and family who are of age. And we will announce new things as we continue to roll out events with Plant Powered Metro New York. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Aisha. And we've got one other fantastic resource to share with you. Caroline Cullis is here. She is the Director of Health and Wellness Programming at Marley Meyerson JCC Manhattan.
Thank you so much, Liana, and thank you, Aisha and Mariana, and the doctors, Dr. Batiste and Chef Brandy and Dr. Barnard. Oh my gosh, what an amazing program. It is our honor and privilege to be partnering with Plant Powered Metro New York. I think it's, 3 years now, Liana? And our next collaboration is going to be on a virtual conference to prevent and reverse heart disease with the Esselstyn Family Foundation. It's February 10th and February 17th. It is completely free. And the reason for this conference is in honor of course, February Heart Health Month. And it's featuring nutrition pioneer Caldwell Esselstyn, Junior MD, author of Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, who demonstrated the reversal of advanced heart disease in his research at the Cleveland Clinic. An internationally renowned surgeon, researcher, and clinician, Dr. Esselstyn is joined by his family of engaging educators to discuss evidence-based whole food nutrition in this 2-day conference. And we so hope that you're going to join us. It'll consist of 4 presentations with Q&As. There'll be, I think, a cooking demonstration in there too. It's from 11 to 1 Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, February 10th and 17th. And together, we hope that we'll all be inspired to heal our miraculous cardiovascular system and simultaneously our whole bodies through the power of nourishing food. So I'm going to put a little link in the chat for you guys to register for that, or you can go to the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan website. I know that Plant Powered Metro New York will be sending that out as well. And I just thank you for this amazing, amazing offering today.
Thanks so much, Caroline. We just are so privileged to have partners like the JCC, like JASA, like SUNY Downstate, and others, and to offer this to you today, and so many great opportunities for more learning. And I just want to emphasize again, what Plant Powered Metro New York is all about is taking the ideas that we've talked about today and making them real in our home community here in the New York metro area. And I know that because of COVID, a lot of you are now getting to know who we are from beyond our borders, and that's a wonderful thing, and we welcome you. And yet we also know that sort of the grassroots community life is really what makes it possible to shift how we eat and to embrace a new way of living, a new lifestyle. So please take a look at all the other resources that are available on our website. I'm publishing here in the chat box a list of our events, and we also have a new recipe app that we have begun to roll out, which has community-generated recipes. And you're welcome to submit your own as well to be featured in the app. And in general, you know, what we want to do for all of you is to make sure that people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and especially those of you who are coming from disadvantaged places, are able to see this as a possibility. It is possible to take your health into your own hands. It is possible to treat and reverse chronic illness with food. And as Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, his famous words written from Birmingham jail. And I just truly believe that for me as a white ally, and for so many of you who come at this from many different perspectives, we can honor his legacy, we can move forward, we can reduce the structural racism in communities and hopefully eliminate it as much as possible by shifting our sensibilities to the plant-based sensibility, to understanding how food can really heal us. So thank you for staying on beyond our time today. It was wonderful to be with you, to learn with you, and please reach out and let us know if you need anything on your own journey to whole food plant-based nutrition and health and healing. Thanks so much.